I've been doing this study on table tennis for the past few years, and I'm very happy to be able to find a platform to share some of the studies. Now, most of the studies here are really based on motor control theories, so it's very theory-based, but the idea here is that we're trying to actually show how these theories are applicable in practice. Now, a quick background about myself. I've been coaching and teaching for the past 15 years from a primary school level and right now in university. So I've seen different type of athletes, I would say, both developmental and skill. So personally for me, what drives me is the idea of skill acquisition. So skill acquisition is one of the theories or the things that we look into in motor control and learning. Now, one of the theories that I am really drawn into is really the Dynamical Systems Theory. Now, this Dynamical Systems Theory sees us humans, as complex neurobiological systems on your own, and we have certain features or characteristics. So I won't go through all of them, maybe I'll just cover a few. Non-linearity in behavior means that we've seen before, right? Our athletes, sometimes we give very little intervention and they improve so much. Whereas those who we give more, they might not improve at all. So this is the non-linearity you talk about. We can see people moving from different level of skillfulness without really this linearity. You know, they jump and shift here and there. Now, if I were to make constraints in dynamical systems, would be if I were to play football, for example, on a slope like that, I would expect the ball to keep on rolling, right? But because I want to keep on playing, probably we change the way we play. We kick the ball upwards just to get the ball and catch it back. And we talk about constraints again, we talk about changing equipment, for example. We change equipment and we see changes in how learners actually learn better, they adapt better into certain things. Now, some few or key terms that I have to go through first before I introduce hysteresis. First is attractors. Now, attractors can also be what we call movement patterns. So if I were to talk about walking, there will be one movement pattern, and another movement pattern could be running. Now, one way we could get them to walk and eventually run is maybe through a treadmill. Alright? So a treadmill with its speed, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to maybe 12 or 14 or 15, right? This is the control parameter. When I were to increase, alright, the speed, for example, on a treadmill, from 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I see a change. So that would be what we call a transition point, right? Something changes from there. Now, hysteresis works like this. As we increase and we see a change from walk to run, and when we go the other way around, that means we reduce the speed now from 6 to 5 to 4. But no, it changed much earlier. So there is this shift, there's this lag, there's this difference, and this difference here is what we call hysteresis. Now, examples of hysteresis has been around very often. We hear it in elasticity, we hear it in magnetism. We know about economy when, for example, we hit a recession. Employment rate takes some time to recover, and there's this long lag, even though the economy has recovered. Talk about neuroscience, some neurons not going back to its original state, even though the stimulus is removed. And we talk about human behavior, which is my area, and certain walk-run studies, reaching and grasping, and of course, I've also read some in rugby. Now, the key research gaps for my area that I really look into is that most of the studies are really lab-based. There are lots of cyclical movements like running, walking. So we started off from the famous studies of finger waggling. Right now it goes into rollerball learning. So if you look at the number of studies, yes, there is a need for us to look further because there's just not enough of what we call discrete action. Now the problem here is that because of this lack of studies, little is really known about the DST phenomena. So one of the phenomena that I really look into is hysteresis. The reason is why, and so what? So what if you look into hysteresis? Now, first and foremost, for you to understand, and I've already shared, this dynamical systems theory, as we are complex systems, we have inherent behaviors. Certain things are fixed characteristically. When you move from one pattern to another, there are reasons for it. Alright, so it gives us an idea that it goes beyond performance scores. It's not just your performance, because we can look at behavior. Now, hysteresis gives us this idea that your tendency, your characteristics, your favoritism based on your previous experience. So keeping that thought, tendency to be influenced by previous experience. I'm using football as an example. Alex Ferguson was a Manchester United manager. He was largely successful. And there was this point in time, Arsenal was one of the giants with them. And they noticed that this player tends to do the same thing over and over again. So his observation was there, and all he did was give that player the ball, recreate the scenario for him to do that action, and he falls into that trap. Beautiful. That's tactics all about, right? You learn, you understand the characteristics, you make it happen to your advantage, and that's what he did. And that's what hysteresis could tell us. So how about table tennis? It's not impossible, it's not unknown to us that we know that certain players have certain tendencies, and it's probably your job as the practitioner to find this out through performance analysis, and of course, use it to your advantage. Now, in my study, we have a few hypotheses. We know that skilled participants will show few movement patterns. That means they are really fixed in what they do. And we expect a narrow hysteresis region. I'll expand more about what hysteresis region is. And novices, of course, they will show more movement patterns, and they will show what we call a larger hysteresis region. I'll get into that soon. Now, my methodology is I have 20 participants, right? 10 in the skilled group, 10 in the novice participant group. My task apparatus, I use a 3D motion analysis at 100 Hertz, right? 9 cameras fixed like that. The participants were required to return the tennis ball from a table tennis robot towards the target here, and it's being fed to 9 directions. If I can show a quick one here. So it's a very simple experiment just for us to see how he changes his movement pattern. He's a skilled player in this sense, so that's why he's hitting all the balls. But I assure you, my novices had a little trouble getting the ball into the target. So you see that he moves to one end, he changes a certain movement pattern after a certain position. Now my data analysis, we put on 3D markers on them, the reflective markers, based on previous studies, look at the upper body only. And we use a cluster analysis approach to find the different movement patterns. So results and discussion. Now in terms of performance, it's very clear who's the better one. So these are the novices and these are the skilled participants. There's a clear dichotomy between them. And we noticed that the best participant was F2. So just keep that in mind. We'll move on. Now in terms of movement patterns, we found that there were 5, right? 3 for skilled, 5 for the less skilled, or rather the novices. And these are their movement patterns like. This is the bad movement. This is the top view. This is the side view, and this is the angle plot of the clavicle and the elbow joints. So if I could just run through quickly, what we see here is a forehand. The red one is a full forehand with the backswing, right? So this is full, whereas we see the rest which are just about hitting the ball and no backswing. So these are variations, whereas these are forehand. So we find 1, 3, and 5 are variations of the forehand, 2 and 4 variations of the backhand. Now for the skill, the distribution is as follows. It looks very clean, very nice. You see green and blue, maybe one different color there, but all in all, we see something very clear. Right? There is a dominant 2-cluster solution shown by the skilled participants. Now 6 out of 10 of these participants repeated the same movement repertoire. Repertoire means that you see the same pattern within one set over the other, and 3 of them have the same throughout. Now this highlights the ability of skilled participants to reproduce their movement patterns in what we heard earlier, right? Automaticity, the ability to choose and decision-making skills, the right movement solution at the correct location. Now these are the novices, and you could see there's a myriad of movement patterns. It's all over the place. There's no particular repertoire also. So again, too many movement patterns to see. All right. At the third set, if you notice, 8 of them, all right, 8 of 10 of them actually adopted a 2 solution. Although, just to put it clearly, these are not the same as the skilled participants, right? So they actually came out with their own, except for F2, which was the best performer earlier. So none of them had the same movement repertoire. Now the hysteresis region, let me go through quickly. Now for the skilled, this represents the movement pattern that they chose, 1, 2, and 3. So 3 is out because there's only 1. This is what we call a meta-stable state. There's no particular influence on this. It just came out of nowhere. Whereas we have this for the less skilled. And you can notice that it has a wider range of hysteresis. That means under one location, they actually adopt many different movement patterns. And this is very clear, and we know it happens. So it's very clear that hysteresis region is wider in less skilled than the skilled. And there's this evidence of metastability and multi-stability. Multi-stability means within one position, you can have fixed numbers of movement patterns. Now, the key contribution to this study is really more on the scientific side of things. And of course, we always wanted to add on to this dynamical systems theory and add on to the knowledge. Now we are clear that we are able to do it through these table tennis tasks. Now, through this hysteresis region, we could see that there are different skill levels, and that's one way you could dichotomize them. Now, the idea here is that we hope that the idea of scaling, or in fact giving variety to the movement pattern, is important, especially in a sport like table tennis or tennis, where spatial location is pretty important. So rather than just training from one location, we expect them to do more. Of course, we also found out that every individual is unique, whether they're skilled or less skilled. We noticed that in the movement repertoire, so we respect that. We also saw that the less skilled participants, the novices, are able to come up with their own movement patterns, and they are quite successful on their own. And we also know that learning is an ongoing process through that cluster distribution earlier. Especially for the skilled, we think that they did not improve a lot, but they still did. Right? That means there's still learning taking place even for them. Now, for future research, one of the things I want to do more is a more experimental setup that's more representative. So I've seen something like that. Maybe the ball can come from a screen. They see something like an opponent. We want to look into a dyadic relationship. Sorry about that. That means we have another, maybe a feeder, right, to give it more representation. Also include the qualitative style of play, because I noticed that different players have different tendencies. For example, I'm an offensive player. I would adopt different strategies. So this is something I want to look into also. And finally, random ball delivery instead of the... so other things we could do is to extend to other sports. Now, we've actually done this on other sports, basketball and football, and we've seen pilot results from there. I won't share too much, but these are other areas we could go into. So I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Chow and Dr. Robert Rain. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your informative presentation.
I was wondering whether it's more or less not a little bit unfortunate to lose some of the strategies, because if you see the skilled players only use two strategies to play the ball back, but I think it could be a weapon when you have more or different ways to return. And of course the task was maybe not designed like this, but I think it's more or less is a weapon when you have more variation in your skills.
I agree with you. I think the reason why we see a very limited number of movement solutions is really because of the task itself. It was really experimental because we wanted to draw out this hysteresis effect. But I agree with you, and I think if we do have a dyadic relationship where we have a live feeder and someone who is and the participant, I would expect a higher number of movement solution coming from the skilled participants rather than the less skilled participants in that sense. Just to share again, we also did another level of an analysis, and what we did see is that when we look at the less skilled participants, right, their quality shots are really low. So if we really take into consideration their movement solutions, it was maybe non-existent because it's low delivery of shots. Yeah.
I think there is a connection in what you just showed us to the differential training, to try different kinds of movements, but on the other hand you said it must be systematic. So how far or how close is that what you want us to learn, or just to the differential training method?
Can I share a next study? So I did mention I did randomized study after that, right? And I found that when I randomized it, we saw similar results. The skilled participants showed similar things. So which comes to my next point. You need not necessarily have a skilled delivery, but there's this idea that you still need to manipulate the spatial locations, right? Maybe not just limited to 2 or 3, but to really go down further, right? To let them explore different movement solution on their own. I hear about creativity earlier, correct? And I think this is something that we probably need to push forward to, because the idea here is that the more you limit the training, the less the exposure they will have. And I think the whole idea here is that we want to give them the opportunity to try. And that's where creativity comes in. And that's where we see maybe more movement patterns that are of high quality. Yeah, so did I answer your question? Thank you very much. All right.
A common characteristics of dynamic systems is for complex systems the acceptance or the existence of bifurcations. That means, if I understand you correct, with your method you could identify the bifurcation location and then amplify learning, because you reach a state where you have all these different possibilities making transition to, so to say, to disordered states.
Yep. So one of the challenges, if I want to look into dynamical systems, was this idea of bifurcations again is the cyclical, because we all started off from the cyclical movement task. And we are stuck with this idea of bifurcations being, if I go back to the finger waggling concept, the idea of bifurcations is pretty clear. But when we look at discrete movement patterns, like, that's where we need to go even further, and probably that's the reason why we had to do a scaling kind of study, just to have that change in movement pattern. And you're right, the bifurcation in this case would be our transition points, which the less skilled participant or novices showed too many and was very difficult to identify for them.